Hi, it's Will from StormTheCastle.com, and it is 12 o'clock noon on a Friday. And what does that mean? Friday fish and chips. Let's go for a walk and talk. And this one is going to be about generational quests, beasts of burden, and blacksmithing. How am I going to tie all that together? Stay tuned. We'll find out. Okay, so I said this is generational quests, blacksmithing, and beasts of burden. And what does that mean? I'll hang in there. I'll try to describe what my point here. First off, let me say sorry that I didn't post this on Friday. I didn't do a Friday fish and chips. And I know some of you very much look forward to that. It's a nice way for us to connect. I think that with some of you, I really connect with these, and I appreciate that very much. I do get email from people telling me how important or how much they enjoy these. This is rather different. I don't think anybody on YouTube is doing anything quite like this. So I kind of like that, but it's also not just that it's different, but that I also, I'm communicating something that's a little bit different too. You know what I mean? Thank you for listening. Feel free to send me an email, shoot me some kind of a message. I'd love to hear about it. I'd love to hear from you. But let's move on to now what it was. I wasn't ready to do a video. It just didn't gel, and then now it's late actually on a Friday after my 12 o'clock deadline. It's late, and the inspiration, it kind of just fully formed for me. I had this idea for this for quite a while, and it gelled. So I'm going to talk about it. I've had this suspicion for a very long time about how, as human beings, we're more than just a solitary unit in time. It's easy to say that we're part of a tapestry that comes from before us and that continues on after us. And I think that a lot's made about DNA and how we pass on our genes and stuff like that. But I also think, and I have this sneaking suspicion, that we pass on other things too. And I don't know how to describe that, but I believe that impressions in your life are occurrences and things that happen somehow, in some way, are transmogrified. That's probably not quite the right word, and passed along to further generations because we're all part of that long skein of yarn that goes beyond our current time. And I actually have the outline for a novel that explores that. Like my novels, even though they're fantasy, they actually explore themes like the left-handed sword that I'm working on. Well, not really working on it lately. I've got other stuff going on, but this actually explores states of consciousness, and I really enjoy that part of it, And so I have the outline for another novel on generational quests, and I could talk a lot about that. I have some themes and ideas, but I'm going to kind of shy away from that a little bit because how it ties into the rest of this vlog and what I wanted to say. So, beasts of burden and blacksmithing. Let me start with blacksmithing. I've been doing it for years now. I'm not sure how many years. And for some reason, I had a affinity for it many years ago. And finally, I always had this vision in my mind of, well, not always, but for a long time, of swords and knives and blades and armor and stuff like that. And what a blacksmith does, and forging, and working at the fire. But I live in a city, average sized city, and it's unheard of. Nobody blacksmiths. I realize, it's getting popular in different places, and it's actually experiencing renaissance, but For some reason, I guess it all ties into my fascination with medieval things. Castles, blacksmithing. Stained glass, mead making, all of that stuff. But the blacksmithing goes to another level, and I'll explain to you why. I guess it was maybe about a year ago. I was at a family gathering, and there were a bunch of people there, and some friends, including a friend I hadn't seen in a long time. He's like a friend of the family. At one point, he was like, one of my sister's, boyfriends. They were dating. They were kind of like in a relationship, kind of. And well, anyway, I'm catching up with him, and talking about what I do, and I mentioned that blacksmithing is one of the things I do, and one of the things I love to do, and he was fascinated by that. Which most people are. I think a lot of people are really fascinated by blacksmithing. There's an aura about it, a mystique. Well, anyway, the real point here is that my mom, who's now, in her 70s, she overheard the conversation and didn't realize that I was, blacksmithing. And she tripped into the conversation and said, "Did you know that your great-grandfather was a blacksmith?" And I was taken a little bit aback by this. I was like, no, I really didn't know, So she said, gee, now that would be her grandfather, my great-grandfather. He was a blacksmith. And I thought that was kind of interesting, She said she didn't know much about it, but I should talk to her siblings to try to dig up a little more information. So I did. I contacted her siblings, and none of them really knew a whole lot more about it. But one interesting thing is that one day he was blacksmithing. He got kicked in the head by a horse, and it changed his life. And one of the little stories is that my grandfather had to carry him home that day after getting kicked in the head by a horse. And I would guess that blacksmiths back then, now we're talking a great grandfather, did a lot of work with horses, shoeing horses, and I think they even were charged with caring for horses and diseases and stuff, and a lot. Horses were a big thing. Farrier work, Well, this all surprised me a lot because, I have a pretty good scar on my head. Not from a horse kick, but from something else. And my affinity to blacksmithing goes beyond, this just recent, popularity on YouTube or on the web or TV shows that are now coming out, and my affinity goes long beyond that. And it made me think about the generational quests and how I started out this vlog by saying stuff like, I think something mysterious is going on there. I really do. It isn't just when you have children or you are children. You're not a blank slate that's inherited DNA for physical and mental attributes. There's also something else going on a deeper level that we don't really understand. So I think there's a connection between me and my great-grandfather who was the blacksmith. And somehow I've retained some of that impression, or I picked up on some of that impression, or something. And the scar on my head maybe is just a coincidence, but I don't know. So here's the final piece of all of that I wanted to say, is that another clue is that pretty much all my life I haven't really been a big fan of horses. Now horses are wonderful, they're beautiful, and they're, amazing, right? I don't know how much they weigh. They weigh, 600 pounds. But I never really been a big fan. And, I've kind of stayed away from them. I've ridden a few, but not very often. And in my books, which are fantasy, there are no horses, which is, I think, probably rare in the fantasy world. Everybody has horses, just like almost everybody has goblins, right? Or, magic, It's kind of common, but there are no horses in my novels. And my first novel, there's no horses. My second, there's no horses. And in my current one, The Left-Handed Sword, there's no horses. You gotta walk. So, and I wonder sometimes if that has something to do with that magical connection that I'm not aware of, that is passed down through me from a time gone by of, hey, be careful of horses. They can hurt, And I'll take it a little bit further here in saying that, the whole beasts of burden thing has also not been very lucky for me in other ways too, because on a trip to Egypt, I was riding a camel. I had for a long time this vision in my mind of I want to ride a camel to the pyramids, and I did. I got a camel and I rode it to the pyramids, but on the way, my saddle, the straps on my saddle, camel saddle, slipped. And the saddle went sideways right off the camel, and I fell to the sand, I didn't get hurt, but I did fall off a camel, and camels are a lot taller than horses. And beasts of burden, on a trip to India, the same thing started to happen with my elephant. I was taking an elephant ride inside this little, canopied, it's almost like a house on top of an elephant. It's like this little canopied structure. And it started to slip. And there was a long drop, off a wall. We were riding up to a castle, and there's a long drop off a wall of 150 feet, So I yelled out to my camel guide, "Hey, the thing is slipping." So he stopped it. He stopped us to check on everything, and I didn't fall, but nor did the canopied saddle fall. But this might all be coincidence. The beast of burden, the falling off of beast of burden, the horse kick, the scar on my head, the proclivity for blacksmithing, and the history of my great-great-grandfather. Great-grandfather. My grandfather's father. My grandfather carried him home after he got kicked. So that's an interesting little thing that I really want to explore more, and I will probably, I will definitely explore it in a book, a fantasy book about generational quests. But the odd thing there is that I won't tell you, in the title of the book. Just like in The Left-Handed Sword, that's the name of that novel. I don't tell you that it's actually an exploration of states of consciousness, right? So, where do we go from there? I don't know. So how does this generational quest proceed beyond me? And why should it? Should it proceed beyond me? And why? And if these things happen, let's suppose that it's true, that there's some kind of an influence that continues on through generations, beyond each segment of generation. And there's a reason for that, All right, so give that some thought in your life. Maybe you have feelings or proclivities or likings or dislikings or interests, and you have no idea why. Maybe there's a deeper reason for it. Maybe it's part of that mystery of what is humanity and what is life, right? It's interesting. So that's it. It is Friday, and I did do Friday Fish and Chips. I won't decide until tomorrow whether I'll post this on a Saturday or a Sunday, or wait until next Friday. I do like the idea of trying to be as regular as I possibly can and post one every Friday at noontime when I go for my fish and chips. But what I do is I go and I record it, and then I have a week to do the narration. I can't record it. I don't record it and talk at the same time. It's an editing process. But I do go, although one time I think I went later. I think I went 1:15 to get my fish and chips, just because of work and whatnot. But I do love to do these, and I think they're important. They're a little bit of a something.